Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the south-afrifur Pawdcast. With us this evening, we have J.M. Horse from Adjective Species. He's the editor-in-chief now. He's been recently promoted, the last 2-3 months now? 5 months,
Yeah.
20 months?
Hey, yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, very exciting. Just the last month or so. So Makio, who was doing the editing, she's now focusing more on the survey stuff. And those of you who filled in the 2015 furry poll will have seen the outstanding work that she's done there. So she's busy crunching those numbers. Gave a data panel at FurCon just a week or so ago, and the 2016 furry poll will be up shortly.
Okay. Awesome stuff. And I mean that'll include all the data from 2015.
Yeah, it's slightly rejigged. The survey's been running for about a decade, so we've got a terrific, huge wealth of data. But it's been rejigged to, sort of modernise a little bit, ask a few different questions, drop a few less useful questions off the list. I've seen a sneak preview of some of those the responses, and one of the things we do ask about is sexuality and sexual behaviour, and it's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know or haven't seen our Tumblr post on south-afrifur on Tumblr, we're going to be doing sort of like a special sort of panel thing with JM as our person that we'll be asking a couple of questions to. We'll be doing a couple of discussion points in respect to, and mostly in respect to sort of sexuality, how it proliferates throughout the furry fandom. Obviously, for a lot of you, this might be something new to you. We're not necessarily sure. Some of you might have just joined us. Some of you might have just joined the fandom and have suddenly found furry.fm and oh goodness me, what is this? These English people talking about? And I mean, we're obviously, if we have to keep most of this conversation as above as possible, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a very, very good sort of look into how it actually happens, what differences there are, why it is that more people seem to, and again, James' research or the research from Adjective Species backs this up, is that as people sort of progress in within the fandom, more of them become more, what's the word?
Homosexual, I think is the word.
Gender fluid sometimes as well, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the really interesting things that we've discovered fairly early on. One of the questions that we ask people how long they've been within furry, and we do ask about sexual orientation as well. And what we've discovered is that the longer people spend in furry, essentially it appears that furries tend to reevaluate their sexual preference within the first sort of 1 to 5 years that they're involved with the community. And the numbers are really surprising. Now, the nature of the survey is that we can't tell when people drop out of furry. We can only measure people that are in the community. But the number of straight furries who are there, who have been involved with the community for less than a year, that number halves in the first 5 years that people are involved with the community. So there's a strong sign that stereotype that people come along to furry and end up reevaluating their sexual preference is true.
Okay. All right. And I mean, the thing is that as obviously most of your research is very sort of numbers based, not necessarily what do you call it? It's a quantitative study rather than a qualitative study. So, I mean, have you ever considered actually going into the qualitative thing where you hand out, say, surveys asking for which specific words they would use to describe how they decided on like, say, either a specific type of sexuality or no sexuality or asexuality? That thing.
It's a really good question. Yeah, we are essentially amateurs, so we run an online poll at furrypoll.com. But there are real researchers out there doing work. They work within fandoms, including furry, and that includes going out to conventions and handing out questionnaires. And if anyone's been to Anthrocon or Furry Fiesta, they will have received one of these in their con bag. One of the things they've just started doing is what they call a longitudinal study, where they get people to sign up for it, and then they follow these people over several years to see what changes, and then try and understand what's going on. It's a little bit too early in that study to draw any conclusions. But one of the problems that they've got immediately is that people that sign up for a longitudinal study tend to be people who have been around furry for a little while. So it's actually really hard to catch people just after they've joined the furry community. If anyone who's listening has just joined the furry community, then it is definitely worth signing up.
What time frame? Less than a year, or
less than 2 years, I think, would be valuable. So they're called you can find them if you just Google it. It's the International Anthropomorphic Research Project. One of the researchers who's got a PhD in sociology, he is a furry. He's written once or twice for Adjective Species over the past couple of years, and they are, they've published several studies on furries to date, and obviously there's more to come. And it's this longitudinal study that'll help answer those sorts of questions.
I mean, obviously, just spot what's the word? Sort of spot tests on people, like maybe asking them inside, like all of the. Obviously, you've gone to many of the conventions and handed out little surveys and things like that, which is great to do, by the way. And I mean, like, where else? What better way than to do it face to face as well? And any sort of like audio recordings that you guys do to figure out when they're asking these questions. Figuring out nuances of how somebody answers a question, whether they're avoiding the topic or not.
Yeah, it's a really good idea because like sexual orientation is one of those things that's basically assumed to be immutable, which means that if you're straight or gay, excuse me, did I say straight or gay? Well, you can be straight or gay, but if you're straight or gay, there's not a great deal that you can do about it. Your sexual orientation is your sexual orientation. And it means that when you've got someone who reevaluates their sexual preference, it doesn't mean that someone who's straight, furry, turns them gay. It means that for whatever reason, in the time they come into furry is the time where they work out what their true sexual orientation is. We have chatted with a few people about it and got a few stories, that sort of that anecdotal evidence that you're talking about. But I guess the short answer is not a huge amount. I mean, I'm one of these people. I'm someone who came into furry, like with a girlfriend and, quite happily in a long-term relationship. And then, like lo and behold, 2 years passed and, it's fallen in love with a male furry and,
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. In fact, I'm married to a lovely gentleman cat.
Yeah. You can say hello if you'd like him to.
Oh, no, that's right. He's off in the background playing, Elder Scrolls Online, the one where you get to be a cat.
Okay, and I mean, and I think Scratch and I could actually pretty much say exactly the same thing for ourselves, in that the more we sort of delved into the entire idea of furry, the more we had the propensity towards, feeling that male relationships weren't in any sort of way wrong, I guess. And I mean, then again, it's not just about it's not just about being straight or gay. I mean, these days there's that massive movement throughout the U.S. where people are coming out as either asexual, pansexual. I mean, the adjectives for the different types of sexualities out there are, I don't know, eventually. Maybe we'll become TV sexual at some point and only love television stars. And there are quite a few people like that out there, by the way.
It's one of the problems we've got with the survey is because the language around sexuality and gender, it is changing. The survey's been running for a while, and some of the questions that we asked, one of the important things that we rejigged in 2015 is questions about gender, because the politics and language around people who are transgender or gender fluid or sort of neither male nor female, it's really complicated, and it's really hard to ask a question that doesn't basically piss people off. We've got there, and something like 20% of furries identify as neither wholly male nor wholly female. So it's a really, really big group. If it's something like 1% of the general population who identify as something other than sort of on the gender binary. Within furry, we've got a huge number of people, and it's it's one of the best things about the community, I think, is that it's an open environment where people can be free to express themselves in whatever way is true to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing with being otherkin. That almost throws the entire idea about sexuality very, very far out of a window sometimes.
Yeah, totally.
And I mean, there's a lot that we need to understand about that kind of group of people, and the same thing as therianthropes and people who believe that they're werewolves or lycanthropes. And I mean, it's interesting to sort of note those kinds of things. I mean, what is the sexuality bias there? And I mean, I'm going to call it a sexuality bias, considering that, I mean, obviously one of the other questions that I have is that how prolific is it within other groups that are as accepting as the furry fandom?
Yeah, it's a question. As it turns out, I guess that this question was coming up, and the scientists, the International Anthropomorphic Research Project, have looked at other fandoms.
Yeah.
Now, the data that they published, so they've got a paper out there. They looked at a few different fandoms, but one of them was anime online.
Mm-hmm.
They also looked at anime at conventions. And demographically, the anime online, they look pretty similar to furries, actually. So they've got an average age in the low 20s. They're about sort of, give or take, they're about sort of 4 men for every woman. They're a lot more heterosexual than furries are.
Yeah.
One of the big differences is that they're, so there's still, it's still only sort of about 2/3 heterosexuals. So that's quite a low number compared to general society. But one of the big ones that comes out is relationship status, and furries tend to be much more likely to be in open or polyamorous relationships. Mm-hmm. It's really uncommon in the anime fandom, but within furry, something like 10 to 15% of furries consider themselves to be in an open or polyamorous relationship, which is it's a big number.
And obviously, one of the other questions would obviously be that, and again, this needs more qualitative study than quantitative study. But I mean, could you even ask, like, how long have you been with your partner? Because one of the other reasons as to why we have these sort of polyamorous things, a lot of people don't necessarily make it work as well as others do, and obviously because of traditional raising, cultural differences, and everything like that, it becomes a difficult thing to be in a relationship while being polyamorous. Even though both of you are polyamorous, there's still that entire idea of, and I think it's something that is slowly being broken down.
It complicates things, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, having said that, there are a hell of a lot of failed monogamous relationships out there. Like when people look at divorce rates, and we can look at our parents, and it's a common issue is that a lack of, there might be friendship but not love, there might be love but not sex, there might be sex but not friendship, and the relationships are difficult, be them monogamous or polyamorous or whatever they happen to be. So I think it's very fair to say that polyamorous relationships or open relationships, they do complicate things, but like if monogamous relationships aren't that easy.
No. And I mean, what I was sort of getting around to is the entire idea that, I mean, it's because of the way that we've been raised, and I think that the newer generations, anything from around about the 1980s onwards, maybe even the 1970s, sort of gently moving towards that entire idea that being polyamorous isn't bad. It doesn't necessarily mean that you love your partner any less. But it's more about the idea that we've been raised to such an extent that it's a man and a woman in a monogamous relationship. The woman is completely and utterly submissive to the man, and that's just the way that it is, irrespective of whether the man wants to be tied up every now and again. It's literally something like that.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm with you. I mean, just thinking back to my history. So, like I was in a long-term relationship with a girl. And in our relationship, it actually became really easy for us to fit into like sort of those generic roles where, like she'd do the cooking and the cleaning and I'd mow the lawn, in that sort of sense. And then all of a sudden in a gay relationship, that sort of stuff sort of goes out the window. And you start from scratch. But it was so easy. I'm someone who, I'd consider myself a feminist. And yet, in a heterosexual relationship, because there was kind of a default way of going about things. And we just never crossed our minds that we should sit back and think about how these things should be done. So it is that those norms that you're talking about, they do have a really strong impact on how people approach relationships and sexual orientation.
No, and from the first stream side here, Wolf at Dawn actually mentions that knowing plenty on both camps, he hasn't necessarily noticed. I'm hoping it's a male, but I'm going to refer to them. Maybe them. They haven't noticed any big difference in the longevity of relationships in both groups as a whole. But again, one of the issues is and there's that entire idea of the research being, I think, a lot less lengthy. I mean, there is you can find the divorce rates from the 1920s all the way up until now in respect to monogamous relationships, but the data in respect to polyamorous relationships, homosexual relationships, asexual relationships, they don't. I mean, you're not going to find that up until anything closer to, say, 1999 at a push.
Yeah, absolutely right.
People didn't really care about that kind of stuff way back when.
It's not that they didn't care. It's just that they tended to sweep it under the rug. I mean, you have the don't ask, don't tell thing. You have that entire sort of perspective of whatever relationship you're in, especially within the military. That doesn't exist there until they're out, or until, you know, it's a very, very complicated look at things. I mean, obviously the status quo is a very, very big, heavy topic over all of this kind of stuff, which means that most research can't necessarily be done without maybe, you know, you going and knocking on a person's door and going, "Hi, would you like to speak to us about, you know, homosexuality and how that affects you?" And then they literally sort of like bring the gun out and go, "You can get off my lawn now, thank you very fucking much." And I mean, that's just the status quo. I mean, they won't answer those questions because they don't necessarily feel comfortable doing so. And that's one of the things that I'm liking from the 1970s up until now, where we're becoming far more open to the idea. I mean, what was it? Foucault actually was talking about the fact that we were far more open about sexuality in the 16 and 1700s than we are open with sexuality in the 1960s.
Calvinism.
Yep, of course. I mean, the thing is that they had people working on the streets who were both sexes. Homosexuality was far more accepted and acceptable, which was weird. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly something happened, and it probably happened around about after World War II, that this entire sort of focus on the stable 2 parents, 2 children model started like proliferating heavily.
The we need more troops model.
Yeah, we need more troops model, exactly. We need to fight these people on the beaches and in the plains and in the air.
Bedroom, apparently.
And in the bedroom, exactly.
Yeah, it is remarkable how much has happened so quickly, and even when you look at things like gay rights, where, you know, like gay marriage was, you know, unthinkable as recently as the 1980s and early 90s, and now it's sort of on its slow way to, you know, like worldwide adoption. But then as that, you know, sort of conversation stopped taking place, then, you know, it's moved on very quickly to things like trans rights. And it's incredible how quickly the conversation in general has moved on. And now people are talking about, you know, what is a very small proportion of the population, you know, somewhere around that sort of 1% or below, and then going, well, actually, the idea that, you know, like male and female are sort of considered to be, you know, sort of a binary where one's black, one's white, or 2 sides of a coin. Then people sort of managing, well, hang on, what happens if that doesn't apply to you? And then it's fantastic, the rate at which it's going on. It'd be interesting to see if the world can keep it up.
No, I mean, and obviously moving towards the entire idea of back push from this, I mean, and the thing is that you can't necessarily even call them in any way conservative in their perspectives. They also feel as though they're being marginalized. Which obviously sort of exacerbates the entire pushback from straight communities, where you have, say, I think it was in California, if I'm not mistaken, there was one person who decided, hey, I'm going to walk down the the normal avenue for the gay parade, and I'm going to have myself a straight parade. He put it out on Facebook. 7,000 people. Yeah. Straight pride parade, and he had 7,000 people on Facebook who were like, yes, no, we're going to be there. And eventually, like, only 152 people, like, confirmed. And then eventually he was the only person there carrying black and white balloons. Yep. You're kind of sitting there going, like...
I think it's worth acknowledging, though, that when, you know, like, we do have movements towards things like, you know, women's rights and gay rights and trans rights, and it does lead to loss of rights of the, you know, the group which is sort of the preeminent or the privileged group. You know, a lot of these complaints are real, and just because the general direction is the right direction sort of the more open and the more accepting direction. It doesn't mean that these complaints are, sort of be tossed aside and go, oh yeah, that's what we'd expect to hear from the patriarchy or white men or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
It's like it is. It's not a zero-sum game. Where like one person's gaining rights is another person's loss, but then nor is it purely positive.
Yeah. And I mean, even speaking about that, and I'm going to have to say this because, what was it? It was Fatigue and Sheen Scratch.
Oh, yes, Bedfellows.
Yes, Bedfellows. Recently released a video, I think it was number 34, episode 34. Those of you who haven't watched it, have a watch.
Recommend
it's actually kind of
Bedfellows.
interesting. Yeah, exactly. Just a little bit of a plug there. At any rate, also ex-South African, by the way, the voice actor. Yes?
Wow.
Yeah.
Did not know he was ex-South African. Okay, well, cool.
Anyway.
I think we might have a new guest. Whoa.
Yes. No. I've been working that cherry for a while. I'm going to stop talking.
Okay.
So the thing is that their recent one is where, like, it's the two of them on a train, and Sheen, being as male as he is and as dominant as he is and domineering and things like that, he obviously spreads his legs open just slightly wider than usual, specifically because it's far more comfortable for men to be able to do that. Otherwise, you're not necessarily very comfortable. But at any rate, so this one woman pops up and she says, close your legs, you're, being rude, etc., etc. And he's like, well, you could just ask me. And then she at one point just says, the only reason why you're, like, still alive is because you're actually just a rape apologist. And, I mean, what kind of, that message that is sent out there is that obviously we have these extremists who then openly oppress people for being the status quo.
Yeah, look, and there's a great history of those extremists really, sort of pissing off the mainstream, but in the end being a force for good. You can look at the 100 years ago and the suffragettes, fighting for women's rights, and they were, they were insurgents and almost terrorists. You can look at the likes of, Malcolm X in the United States when it came to, sort of racial politics.
Yes.
There's a long history of that. I'm not sure that I can't think of any obvious gay insurgents, but I'm sure that there are examples. And I think that that's just one of those examples where you've got essentially, like that feminist point of view. And, the way they're acting there is not, like reasonable, but it's also a reaction to a, inequitable society.
Mm. I mean, like, it's, I guess, one of the things that I'll put to you is the entire idea. One of the questions would always be is that, like, when people find the furry fandom, genuinely they obviously find what seems to be a very, very open, very accepting, circle. And I guess one of the questions that I think, if it hasn't been asked yet, should be asked is, was one of the reasons why you found the furry fandom and decided to join up and stay here, was it because you felt that you were ill-accepted anywhere else?
That's a terrific question. It's so hard to try and find out or try and work out why people come into furry, because the magic of furry is that there's no definition for what a furry is. It's a club where you're a member if you decide you're a member, and there's no other criteria. But then when you look around, and we've been doing a bit of work with non-English speaking furry groups, and we've got some data from Russian language furries and Italian language furries, which seem to be the two biggest non-English languages. And when we look at the demographics, and the sample sizes are much smaller than what we have for English, but they look remarkably similar. When you look at the stuff that, like sort of makes the furry community stand apart, like the range of sexual orientations or gender expression or gender identity, is that they look really, really similar. And now you wouldn't think that. You wouldn't think, if we're going to go and look at furries in Russia, you'd go, okay, well, they're going to be less gay because the country is less accepting towards gay people. But we just don't see that. When you look at the Italians, you just don't see that. They look really, really similar. So there's something going on that does attract people to furry. There seems to be a worldwide phenomenon, even with the language barriers that are in place when you go to parts of Eastern Europe especially. But yeah, exactly what it is. And it makes sense that it's something which they're attracted to it because it's accepting.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, one of the things that what you're obviously on furry.fm as well, which is a primarily German listening station. So the vast majority of the people or the furries on furry.fm are in fact German. And I mean, obviously, you're looking at what was it, Italian and Russian.
Russians.
Italian and Russian. So the German furries tend to speak English. In Western Europe at least, people do tend to sort of default to English. So if you go to Eurofurence, which is held in Germany, or really any of the Western European conventions, then English, if it's not a first language, then it's a common second language. And the same goes in Southeast Asia, surprisingly.
Yeah.
So you go to furry conventions anywhere from sort of Japan to Malaysia, and English is very common. So there don't seem to be many parts of the world where it's not English.
Have you actually considered Brazil?
Yeah, we haven't got a huge amount of data on the South Americans. I don't know how. It's a good question. I can tell you that as best we can tell, people aren't engaging with furry websites like WikiFur in Portuguese.
No, this is true, but they do happen to have their own websites up now. They've actually, if Potteroo is correct, they've had their first convention. It was either last year or the year before. And I mean, I do actually have a contact for you eventually if you'd like to maybe sort of delve in that way. Yeah, Brazil. There are Brazilian furs out there, many of them, and it seems like they're actually beginning to proliferate quite heavily. It's just that obviously for them, for language sites like WikiFur and things like that, it may be a bit more difficult for them to find the information that they need.
WikiFur is a multi-language site. It's the reason why I used it as an example. So WikiFur is in English, but the Russian language WikiFur is 40% the size of English language WikiFur. It's huge.
Anyway, so Rakuin mentioned that apparently he's made a better definition instead of self-identification because he says that it's a terrible criteria. So when he does bring his contrarian. Yes, I know when he does bring his sort of, if he does put that down, then I'd be willing to hear it. He's obviously said that they've had 2 with 1 closing this year, apparently. Yes. Wow. Rakuin does the sideways glance face.
Just on Southeast Asia, it's something that I'm digging through at the moment. I've been able to, just in Southeast Asia, I've been able to identify 9 furry conventions in places like, so not just Japan, but Singapore, Taiwan, Thailand, Malaysia, and China and the Philippines. It's growing there rapidly. It's really quite remarkable.
Those sirens that you have in the background are almost very well timed sometimes. Like the furries are growing in Southeast Asia. Woo!
Shut down everything.
That's just the magic of living in London, I think.
Okay, so those of you who know Flavor, Rakuin has in fact posted a link here. So we'll definitely put that in the video, and we're also just going to pop it over to the furry.fm side for those of you who are interested in reading it. Rakuin is a very long-time contributor to Flavor now.
Yeah, I've seen Rakuin's name pop up for years now.
Well, his definition is furry is describing a character who is possessed of a combination of animal and human characteristics in such a way that the new character is significantly different from the character's real or canon form. Obviously, he says that it matches Nuka's, but without the word self-identification tacked on.
that was my nonsense when I said that you're a furry if you decide you're a furry. That's the only criteria for taking part. But no, I take Rakuin's definition as being it's a pretty good one actually, and sort of matches up generally what it means to be a furry or identify as a furry.
Yeah,
mine's a bit self-referential.
Look, I prefer the word self-identification because it is self-identification. You create this thing and you self-identify with it. You feel as though you want to be a fox and a wolf connected to one another in some really strange way, like cat dog. Then go right the hell again. Like, I mean, why not? I mean, it's really, really strange. And where do you go to the bathroom? But But yeah, I mean, like it's questions like that. I mean, and that opens up a whole different sort of topic altogether because I mean, obviously Uncle Kage's most famous for persona is a cockroach,
Yes.
which isn't an animal.
Yeah, and there's lots of people as well who identify as part of the furry community, but not they don't have a furry character, so to speak.
Yeah.
There's
I
lots
just
of
don't
people
think
out
that
there who are
there's
just
any one definition. I don't, and much as sexuality, since all the terms are recently coming out. I mean, pansexual. I mean, what back in the 1990s, if somebody said pansexual, a person would look at you extremely strangely and wonder if
yeah.
there are any holes in your pants.
Yeah, that's right. And nowadays, it's becoming it's a much more popular term nowadays because bisexual tends to imply that you're only interested in people who are either completely male or completely female. And so
Yeah.
pansexual is a little bit more of an inclusive term, or it could be seen that way. I mean, certainly, when we ask the question on the furry survey, we're getting more and more pansexuals every year.
Mm. But I mean, and even then, it's almost as though pansexual becomes a stopgap. It's a term that you identify with for now until you find a term that actually defines yourself a little bit better. And I'm pretty sure that maybe in like 2 years' time from now, pansexual won't be the sort of up and coming replacement for bisexual anymore. And I mean, some people are like, what is it, an amorphous, asexual.
Yeah, one thing that we've seen a bit more of, or at least I've seen a bit more, is a term called sapiosexual. And I think because
Yes.
pansexuals kind of sounds like you're, sort of, like out and about a lot, to put it politely. Whereas sapiosexual is to say that, well, I have sex with people that I'm only close to or that I fall in love with or at least close friends. And that's a way of perhaps, explaining that your sexual orientation isn't tied down to a particular gender, but without the perhaps the amount of sex that might be implied by someone saying that they're pansexual. Because pansexual,
And again,
I think some people
yeah.
can read it as "I'll have sex with anyone."
Yeah, and again, like if you look at Racoon's definition, which was defined in 1926, granted, yes, I mean it obviously came back from 1970, 1926, and Freudian psychology, which is not necessarily as
Oh no, it's a
I'm,
definition. That's okay. We don't
yeah,
have. We can agree with the definition without agreeing with Freud.
It's originally in a reference to the view that sex instinct plays the primary part in all human activity, mental and physical. This was held by his critics to be the view of Freud, therefore a term of reproach leveled at early psychology.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. I just want to say as well that it's not. You mentioned it a couple of times, but like furry is a sex-positive environment, and that doesn't mean, or doesn't just mean, that we're positive towards, like sort of the way that people go and have sex. It's also, sort of a acceptance of people's right to not have sex, and
Exactly.
be that
I mean,
people who are not interested, but it also means people who are asexual or whatever it happens to be. It's a big part of furry. That there's a good job with not just people who are having sex, however weirdly, but also people that are choosing not to have sex at all.
I mean, like if this is the case, and I mean I had to use pansexuality to explain myself, I would have to say that I'm a pansexual that leans towards men, but has had relationships with women, but can't necessarily sort of disregard the entire idea of a specific personality sort of catching my fancy. And frankly, most of the time it's not like, oh, your personality is hot, and I want to have sex with you now. I mean, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it's different for everyone. That's just part of the I don't know. It's one of the things I like about furry is the fact that you do have this huge range of sexualities.
I mean, and sometimes people play female characters, and that's absolutely fine. In fact, if you consider the entire idea that, say, if you look at within the non-furry, I guess they call it sexting, we call it RP. I mean, you look at something like that, and you look at the way that some people sort of act as though they're women, but they're men, and you kind of sit there going like, there's obviously something underlying in their sort of perspectives, and that's something that can actually be looked at.
Yeah.
But I mean, when and it was back in 2003, 2002, where I was even playing a female character on one of the things, specifically because I was trying to figure out, to a large extent what it was like, and I couldn't necessarily play a male character doing that because at that point I didn't believe that it was right.
Yep.
So it's quite an interesting perspective. I mean, and a lot of people create female characters, and a lot of people don't necessarily know that other people had female characters.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
flatmate usually plays female characters in RPGs just because, well,
Ass.
it's me out ass. If you're gonna be staring at someone's backside the whole game, might as well be something you like.
It does it for ass reasons. Excellent.
Okay, that's the reason why Minecraft is good. It's not about the ass, because there isn't one.
Yeah.
One of the things with furries demographics. Sorry if I'm interrupting your spiel here. Just something that sort of came to
No,
mind,
go.
which
Not at all.
I think's worth adding. Because furry does have these demographics, so they've got this sort of wide range of sexual preferences. But we are male dominated. It's about, like I said, it's about 4 men to every woman. 80-20, but sort of another 20% are a bit neither here nor there. And what it means is that a lot of the sex that goes on is between men, and so it makes furries seem gayer than it is. We've got the survey data, and it's been consistent throughout the decade or so we've been running it. There are more heterosexual furries out there than there are homosexual furries. It just doesn't seem that way, and it doesn't seem that way because, and I'm going to engage some mathematics here. It's a thing called the friendship paradox, and what it means, it's the difference between like reality and experience. And the friendship paradox says that your friends have more friends than you do, and it's true. So, like people you follow on Twitter or on Facebook, if you have a look at the number of friends that they've got, then, on the whole, you'll find that your friends are, like better liked than you are. And it's just because that if you're someone who has a lot of friends, then you know more people. And so therefore the people you know are more likely to be the more popular people, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it does actually mathematically add up, and it comes with all these little interesting outcomes. So, for example, your sex partners, on average, have more sex than you do. So when you have sex with someone, it's probable the person you're having sex with has had sex with more people than you have. So it's the normal situation to be the less experienced partner when you're having sex. It also means that your friends are better looking than you are. I hate to say it. Because better looking people tend to have more friends. And so therefore your friends tend to be better looking. And it's the reason that furry looks a bit gayer, and I think it also looks a bit more sexually active than it is in reality. I think that straight furries tend to sort of get pushed to one side. I think asexual furries tend to get pushed to one side, simply because when we're having conversations like this one and we're talking about sex in general, is that we're just not going to talk about people who are not having sex. And obviously that includes asexual furries, and to a large degree that means the heterosexual furries. It's just a numbers game. It's unfortunate for the heterosexual furries that there are fewer women out there, at least obviously, inside furry. But it's a fact of life that, if you're a heterosexual furry, you've got limited options. If you're a gay furry, it's a buffet.
Mm-hmm. No, very much.
Hot dog down a whole way.
Yeah, well, your options are a lot more open for sure, and almost even more so if you're not on the gender not like driven towards the gender binary, pansexual, as we want to use as a stopgap term. Because if you're not picky, then hell.
Yeah, that's right. You just and if you're male and you're
someone.
Yeah, and if you're male and you're bisexual or pansexual, just the numbers mean that you're more likely to end up sleeping with a guy than you are with a girl, just because there are more men around. It's as simple as that.
Interesting. Very interesting.
I think so. There's. Do you remember there was a friend of mine in Australia? He created a thing which is called the YIF chart, which I think most people will know about. But what he did is he created a website. The Australian community was small enough at that point so that kind of everyone knew everyone, and he created a little way that people could anonymously input other furs that they'd had sex with. And so he did that. Each name gets sort of narrowed down to like a number, so it's all anonymized. And he gathered data from hundreds and hundreds of furries who all said who they'd had sex with, and then plotted a big network diagram showing all the connections. And it was really interesting. Sorry.
No, that reminds me of the gobweb.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyways, it's called the YIF chart. It's still kicking around. I've got a copy of it here. I'm not sure.
Really?
It's on Wikifur. Yeah. You can find it. It is anonymized. I'm on there somewhere. But what it shows is that furry. It's incestuous is a good word for furry, in that people tend to be quite closely connected, and that you'd be hard pressed to be more than say 3 or 4 degrees of separation from basically any other sexually active fur in the Australian community, at the time anyway.
That's easily, like, what's it, 5 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yeah, except sexy Kevin Bacon. Sexy furry Kevin Bacon, yeah.
Wow.
And what it shows is there's actually a really small number of heavily trafficked nodes, let's call them. And they act as... and so they act as... But there aren't actually that many of them. We worked out what the average number of furry sex partners in Australia was because we had enough of a sample. And it's 4. Now, 4's, you know, it's neither a high nor a low number. It's around about the same as people of the same age who are not furries. But obviously the gift chart doesn't include non-furry sex partners. But that average is skewed by the fact that there's this small number of people that had sex with, you know, like 30 people. But that means that the large proportion of furries had basically, you know, 1, 2, or 3. And of course, you know, there are very few zeros on there. Some people did input themselves as a 0. Perhaps.
Now, does that include, is that just physical, like sort of sexual contact, or is that also like RP sexual contact?
No, I'm pretty sure it's physical.
It was meant physical, but look, it's one of those things. It was done anonymously. It was done on the internet. Everyone took it as the joke that it was always intended to be. So, honestly, who knows? I know that the chap in question, he did have ways of removing what you know, he considers to be pretty obviously like false data, where people had tried to put in like, you know, nonsensical numbers. But yeah, this is, I mean, this isn't science, right? This isn't peer reviewed. You know, this is people giggling and going online saying, I did it with this person.
No, but I mean, Wolf of Dawn actually makes it. This is actually really, really awesome. He wants the term slut to be replaced by heavily trafficked node.
No, I agree completely. That is the single most PC term I've heard for someone who's a slut. Like, that is the single best thing ever.
Yeah.
Look, honestly, sorry, go.
So I was just going to say, it just reinforces the idea that sex is one of those things that we, you know, we see a lot of and we hear a lot about, but actually there's less of it going on than you think. We do ask the question as well on the furry survey, how important is sex to you? And then the next question is, how important do you think sex is to other furries? And what happens is that the numbers, you know, that people give themselves relatively low numbers, but they assume that sex is more important to other furries. It's not. And all that does is it shows that what it seems like is not reality. Sex seems to be more important to furry than it really is. And that's just, it's the friendship paradox. It's just the natural outcome that, like you say, you're going to have these heavily trafficked nodes tend to be well known. And the people who are, you know, like the asexual or heterosexual furs are just people don't think about them when they're thinking about sex.
Huh. But, you know, I mean, in that same sense, I mean, you know, you obviously ask people when they're on a forum or anything like that, or in any way answering a survey, be as honest as possible. But the thing is that they're generally just going as honest as they think they are in their mind. And I think the honest answer would be how much you think other furries think. That would probably be their answer. And then the actual answer would be the answer that they'd been given.
Yeah.
Like how important is sex to you? Okay, so 8 out of 10 would have been the other number. So it's in fact 8. 8 is how important it is to you, but 4 is pretty much how important it is to everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got that. I'll drop a link. I've got some basic demographic information. It's about sort of in the first stream chat. There you go. So you can click on that and scroll down too. There's a whole bunch of data there. But Record makes a good point saying that don't the previous year's results influence that question each year? And the answer is, well, we don't know. You know, we can't measure influence. You know, this is a survey which people volunteer to do. The researchers think that the quality of the data is very high. There's evidence to suggest that it is. So, for example, no matter how we collect the information, the numbers seem to turn out to be the same. In 2015, we had almost 13,000 respondents, which is a huge number. And the numbers there look the same as they did, you know, as the sort of the lower surveys of, which are sort of down in sort of the 3,000-4,000 sort of range. But the fact is that when it comes to how repeatable are these numbers or how accurate they are, is that it's impossible to tell, because the only way to tell would be to compare, like you have to know what an average furry was, and that'd be the way you'd test what, how accurate the numbers were. But of course, there's no way of doing that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously now sort of speaking about furry and sexuality and things like that, I mean, there's this obvious, and we've already debunked it to an extent just via your research in how there are still more heterosexuals within the furry fandom. One of the things is that obviously when parents find out, oh, my son, daughter, transgendered lady is a furry, oh, they're going to become gay, blah, 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 blah. I mean, is there any way that you can actually interact with them and say, look, if it was going to happen, either whether I was part of the furry fandom or not, it was going to happen. It wasn't the furry fandom's fault that it happened. It's just that they're an open and accepting group of people. Maybe you should speak to one of them one day to find out just how terrible we really are.
Yeah, well,
so what I shouldn't say is that 50% of straight furries end up deciding that they're gay within the first 3 years.
Yeah.
No, obviously, I mean that's an obvious that's a statistic that does point towards that. But in that same sense, I mean, they identify as straight beforehand, and then finally identify as something more. What you couldn't necessarily say it's more acceptable, but I mean it's.
You say more unusual.
They accept that. I mean, geez, the first time you see a very, very good artistically drawn male fur, as from a male perspective, you kind of sit there going like, yeah, I could get into that. It was literally, I mean, like, this was exactly how these were conversations that I had with Scratch when I was, 15, 16? Scratch?
Something around there.
Where I was going, if this was true, if this was how it was supposed to be, if we were in fact the embodiment of our fursonas, I'd be into that. In fact, I would be bisexual. Like at the time, that's what I said, and I kept that throughout from 15 all the way to about 23 when I finally came out. But I mean, even so, it was something like that where I was going, yes, fine, maybe it's what do you call it? Not overdramatization.
A stepping stone. There's amongst the psychologists researching furry, there's a school of thought. It's not something that's easy to prove, but they think that like adopting a fursona is a way of testing out personality traits in a safe environment, and that might be testing out like different genders or different sexual orientations, or even moving away. If someone is depressed, there's good research showing that playing as a second person, be that through cosplay or be it through some sort of other avatar that they've created, helps people sort of role play what it's like to no longer be depressed, and that can actually show like sort of a stepping stone, a route to sort of a better mental health. It's a really interesting idea, and the thing that they have come up with and they have shown is that they ask about personality, and they also have personality of the fursona. And basically, the closer your fursona is in personality to yourself, the happier you are likely to be. So that correlates with happiness and self-esteem. And of course, the opposite of that, sort of implies poorer mental health. So it's a really interesting little school that they're, like a school of ideas that they're following up on that one.
That's really cool. And it makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, and if your story there, about, sort of, looking at, like furry dudes with their pants off and going, whoa, if you don't mind me paraphrasing you, is a way of like testing out your orientation, seeing if it works for you. And, likewise, like, playing around with different genders, is a way of testing out. And you might find out that it's not your sort of thing. You might find out that it is, but at least it gives you that information on which you can make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, what is it? Wolfadorn asks, is that rubbish or self-correcting?
Well, I mean, it's self-correcting when you're talking about things like gender and sexual orientation. I don't think that furry makes you anything, but like it's not easy being a person. It's not easy living in a head and sort of working out what it is that you actually think. if that were the case, then people who were gay or had an unusual sexual interest would be able to accept that as easily as people can accept being heterosexual and being interested in a boy being interested in boobs. It is more complicated, and it's not often easy to work out what it is that you want.
Yeah.
No,
So I think
life doesn't come with a freaking manual. Nobody knows what who wants.
Yeah. Interestingly, furries in general, compared to the general population, are higher in happiness and self-esteem than the general population.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
No, it's interesting. Now, Kane mentions that a furry is a gateway. I wouldn't necessarily say it's much of a gateway, since if we talk about gateway drugs, we're talking about something that lets you get in there and then you just get hooked onto cocaine and then you destroy your entire life. And he mentions the entirety of sexual deviance as well, and I'm not necessarily sure that I agree with that, in that it is a gateway towards sexual deviance. In fact, there are a lot of people who are of older, maybe you could call them generations, who don't necessarily feel that sexual deviance is necessarily the way to do that. And a lot of people follow these people and understand them for what they're saying.
Yeah. There is definitely a lot of sexual deviance out there within furry. One of the things that we added to
sexual deviance out there anywhere else. I mean, if it doesn't necessarily take furry for you to feel that you want to be tied up into a sling, and
no,
it doesn't
that's completely right.
Yeah, but again, as you mentioned, furry being such a sex-forward community, it pops up in conversation more often. If I can go that far.
It's far more open, and the thing is that what we need is more open conversation anyway throughout all parts of society, rather than just like niche groups. It's not right to actually have this conversation within ourselves the entire time. I think it's for the betterment of the human race, we need to be able to speak about these things, because if we speak about them openly and honestly, all the wrong things that you would be doing could then be sort of conversed about.
No, that's fantastic. We've got Reverend just in the chat asking about defining sexual deviance. I'm defining it as basically unusual sexual practices. It doesn't imply a positive or negative judgment. It just means something which is a little bit outside of the mainstream.
Deviant as in deviation, as in not on the same course as most.
Yeah, I really love the way that you're saying. Like we do ask in the new last year's furry survey, we asked about like actual sexual activity. Basically a top 20, just to see how many like furries would tick. I am interested in this. And basically what we found out is that no matter what we put down, it's everything from inflation to cub porn or anything else that you care to mention. And basically all of them came up with more than 10% of furries ticking that button. Now, whether those numbers are special to furry, or if you ask the members of the Women's Institute, and whether or not they would give honestly the same answers is impossible to say, because there's so much sort of moral panic around sexuality in general. That moral panic doesn't exist to anywhere near as big a degree in furry as it does out there in the general world. So it's very difficult. There's a research out there that shows that when you ask people about unusual sexual behaviour, and the way they test this is they just ask people whether or not they're gay. People underreport. So if you ask, it's a great study. They asked the entirety of the population, or a significant sample of the population, are you gay? And they came back with about 0.7%. Then they asked an indirect question along the lines of, have you had a sexual experience with someone of the same gender as you? And it comes back to be about 10 times that. The real number's about 6%. So people do underreport sexual deviance.
Yeah, but now Rakuin says that there should be a definition. If somebody meets these criteria, then they are whatever. Now, Rakuin and I have had our differences on this perspective before, in that I don't necessarily feel that the term... I call this boxing in. I call this labeling and putting somebody into a box and saying, this is the box that you're in, and this is the box that you will stay in. I mean, is it so difficult for... I mean, what are the criteria? Are there one or two criteria? Is there too many criteria? Will there be too little criteria? Now I'm rambling again, but I mean,
Yeah, no, it's really hard to put your finger on. It is so hard because to come up with criteria and definitions, and you need to come up with a definition that everyone understands. And that's not just the scientists, the people answering the question. They've got to have the same understanding. So it's really, really difficult to get hard numbers for this sort of stuff.
Yeah. And again, the thing is that for purely scientific reasons, obviously the boxing is necessary, but it's unfortunate that the scientific information then becomes translated as this is what they are, and this is why we don't like them.
That categorization though, like the people that fill in the furry survey, all of you furries out there, like we get a lot of people take a lot of time and care, and they give details about their species, why it's important to them. They talk about gender and multiple characters and sort of how different characters reflect different parts of themselves. And so someone will sit back and sort of write a few paragraphs on, so this character is of the different gender, but is asexual. This character is what I'm like if I'm like doing sexual role playing, and they're interested in this, and all sort of stuff. And we'll sort of read that and go, bisexual, tick the box, move on, because we have to categorize them. Without categorizing them, then we can't put together the data analysis, and it just means that we're making these wild simplifications all the time.
Well, if you don't, unfortunately, the bar graph's going to look very, very strange.
Exactly.
There's going to be an enormously long tail, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right, and you just don't learn anything.
You're going to have
the phrase "the long tail" is great when you're talking furry research. I love
it.
Now, Kane does have a question here. I'm just trying to figure out how to put it. He's putting to the panel, does the furry gay community have the same distance for bisexuals as the people in the gay community?
So in the gay community, there's a sense that calling yourself bisexual is a way of being gay, but without the stigma. And so among some, I think it's gay men mostly, they're sort of a bit suspicious of bisexuals, essentially saying they're trying to eat their cake and have it too. I don't think that exists within furry. I don't think that there's a stigma around bisexuality or non-exclusively heterosexual or homosexual sexual orientations. That's not to say it's not there. I certainly haven't experienced it.
Apparently, Kane mentions.
Sorry, Kane.
Yeah.
I hope I got that right, Kane. I hope I got I summed up your argument reasonably well.
Well, he says that gays and lesbian people hate bisexuals to an extent.
That was what I was trying to say, but I was saying it politely.
I don't know. Maybe they think we're greedy or something, or whatever.
Yeah. No, bisexuals are delightful.
Okay. No, he says it's fine. Then there was a post by Raccoon again. He says that Reed's sexual orientation is a mixture of who you're romantically attracted to, who you're sexually attracted to, and who you've actually had sex with. And that, again, doesn't necessarily put down the criteria as a set thing. I mean, just because I'm romantically attracted to Dane Cook doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to have sex with him.
You would if you had the chance.
No.
Okay.
It'd be embarrassing.
It would be kind of weird.
Like you could do it but not tell anyone.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. I wouldn't tell anyone, would I? And I also wouldn't want anybody to know about it. So that's where my come in. Is there any? Yeah.
He makes a fantastic point. He's asking about basically what does sexual orientation mean, and he's got three different things there. Romantically, sexually attracted to. There is a definition of orientation. And let's see if I can get this right, because I'm going off the top of my head. For a sexual orientation to be true, you have to fantasize about, romantically attracted to, and for them to be your primary partner. So it's about romance. Ignore the ringing in the background. It's about what you think, what you do, and what you fantasize about. And that's kind of the rough criteria that researchers use. Okay. But you don't. When we don't ask these questions, we say, "What is your sexual orientation?" and we give people what they answer, whatever is best for them. We had a bunch of different answers. I think it was I forget who it was said that they were asexual, biromantic. And that's a really good answer. I forget who it was. Hopefully they're still listening and can
It was
put their
Raven
hand.
song.
It was Raven, was it? Yeah,
Yes.
and that's so someone who answers that in the furry survey, we just click asexual, because that is probably the best way to sum that up. It certainly doesn't sum up Raven, but yeah, it's just the nature of any sort of research. You have to put people into little boxes, and then you use those little boxes as a way of making conversation.
But then again, some people again would always take those boxes one step too far. I'm looking at you, Fox News.
And just saying that Raven's asking about does it cover sexuality and romantic orientation? And said no, we only cover sexuality. It'd be something that we may cover at some point in the future, but honestly, you can't have a survey that's too long, so we try and keep it as short as possible.
Oh, JM, a fur named Bangladesh says hello.
Oh,
Or furry
hello.
delicate.
Sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not looking at the.
No, I'm just letting you know.
Yes.
They said they asked for us to say hi to you.
Excellent. Well, good day.
It's just and again, like I mean, yeah, I mean, and then Kink goes, I'm definitely toy sexual.
Yeah. Kane's asking about the bisexuals. Are they just gays that are too scared to admit it? And I think that actually that does exist out there in the real world gay community. I haven't spent much time in that world, but I have come across that one where people kind of say, "Oh, bisexuality doesn't exist. It's just a polite way of saying I'm gay, but without like going all the way." But it's more complicated than that. And I think that anyone who's sitting back and saying that bisexuality is wrong or impossible that's just they're not living in the real world.
I guess to an extent, it could also be that bisexuality has become a fairly outdated term.
Maybe.
In the manner that things are moving forward, I guess.
It is. Oh, it's a nightmare of like just politics and language because it's still developing. We're still trying to find words that describe all of these weird things that we are.
Yeah. That's kind of like what I wanted to touch on a while back when we were talking about that, actually, like with what pansexual like being a stopgap term. How granular are we going to have to go before everyone's satisfied?
Yeah, with the because gender is a particularly sensitive political area at the moment. For the 2015 furry survey, we ask about gender and gender expression, and rather than having checkboxes, what we have is a diamond where you can, sort of with, like male and female and like different expressions, so you can sort of click anywhere and go, yeah, okay, I'm about there. And it's a way of allowing for that sort of granularity. Unfortunately, when you click in that area, we then go and like plonk you into whatever like simple, basic, offensive, reductive box that we find convenient. But at least it means that people do, it acknowledges at least that it's not that simple. We don't live in a world where people are either gay or straight. We don't live in a world where all people are either male or female. It's one of those things that we just don't have great language for at the moment. It's fraught. Let me tell you, writing about this stuff on Adjective Species, it's got to be really, really careful to do it in a way that actually makes sense and is readable, but also in a way that doesn't, unreasonably annoy people. It is tough.
I can imagine. I mean, as scientific as your research, or not your research, your presentation is, it will most likely end up pissing someone off.
Yeah, I mean, that just comes with the territory, really. I think it's better talking about this sort of stuff and, thinking about it and writing about it and reading about it than just saying, no, it's too hard.
There are, I think, if I'm reading this list correctly, over 60 different terms.
That sounds about right.
Z, two-spirit, transvestite, transsexual. This is from the bottom. Transphobia, trans man, trans woman, transitioning, transgender, top surgery. What? Okay, that's a surgery. Third gender, stud, scoliosexual. Attracted to genderqueer and transsexual people and expression. People who don't identify as cisgender. Huh.
Yeah.
I would imagine that could actually be taken in a completely different way, especially if scoliosexual was spelled with a C.
Yes, indeed.
So yeah, I mean, like again, 60 something different terms. SGL as well, same gender loving, pansexuals in here. I'm going to post this down. Another link that we can have a look at. Scratch.
Mm-hmm.
Put
And
that
one
in
of the
there.
things that's like is that out there, sort of on the coalface of sort of progressive gender politics. There's a lot of these terms are being bandied around, and when people hear them for the first time in the mainstream, the natural reaction is to go, "Well, that's just silly." They find these terms to be people use to say, "Oh, that's politically correct" or "that's silly." But the fact is that we do need these terms. We need some terms to be better at
Yeah.
sort of talking about this, and you do need to try things out. Some of those terms do come across as being like pretty far out there, but yeah, they are helpful. The old acronym, the LGBT, which is or LGBTQ, even that's relatively new. Only what
LGBTQI. LGBTQIAAA.
Yeah.
A.
I don't reckon we're too far away from being able to spell something awesome like, I know, Terra Bulge. That's what I'd like to have.
Yeah,
Wow.
no,
But it was only like it was only 15 or so years ago where the B got added, and it was like we're all BLTs for a while there. Well, no, well,
well,
it's
some
a
of us
sorry,
are.
yeah, it's something which is changing. You could make the argument that the T doesn't belong because it's got nothing to do with sexual orientation. But of course, we all know that if you're a gay man, then part of the problem that you have to deal with in society is that you're kind of seen as being feminine. And you could say that homophobia is partly based in misogyny and sexism. And certainly part of transphobia is based in that as well, because there seemed to be something, wrong or weak about transitioning from male to female. So, it makes sense that they go together, but even so, T is definitely one which is a bit of an apple among the oranges.
Mm.
Mm.
That was actually something that we did mention that we wanted to talk to you. Like, I know this doesn't specifically have to do with any of the research regarding to the furry group, but like, where do you think homophobia stems from mostly? Something like the phobia or fear of irrational fear, whatever you want to call it, of people of other.
Catholics.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of things. I think firstly, people when they hear about homosexuality for the first time or something they're not used to talking about, then they immediately think about sex. And sex, intellectually is pretty gross. I don't care, if you're male, female, or if there's 1,000 of you. It's a bit weird. And sex is one of those things where our society, we're sort of conditioned to think of sex as being shameful. There's a story I was reading not long ago, actually, about a woman who'd written into an advice columnist saying that she loves her boyfriend and she gets, like these great foot massages for him every day. And then she recently found out that he'd been looking at foot fetish websites, and she just realized that she'd be getting these foot massages because it turned him on. And all of a sudden she found them to be disgusting. And that is when you throw sex into the equation, people do have that reaction. And that reaction of disgust that she's having, which is wrong, it's a pretty natural one. And that's a similar reaction that people have when they think about homosexuality. They don't think about it from a romantic or a love point of view. They think about it as a sexual act. And then people go, oh, there's all this weird stuff with, bums and dicks. That's gross. I can't believe that you would do that to another dude. And I think a lot of it is based in that. It's based around shame around sex rather than any specific problem with homosexuality.
Which is why the conversation needs to be widened. But I mean, in the words of a wonderfully well-known by now, what was it? No, it wasn't Ghanaian. He was Ugandan. A Ugandan pastor. They eat the poo-poo.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly the kind of reaction that you get. Like, oh yes, I'm gay. You eat the poo-poo? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on,
Yeah.
dude.
As Kane points out, there's more heterosexual anal sex going on than there is homosexual anal sex.
That's exactly the point that I'm trying to make. Is that not just within the furry fandom, and not just within the gay society, not just within the transgender society, all of these things that have been done. That are being done and being found out that they're being done, etc., have proliferated throughout heteronormative sort of perspectives for years and have not been spoken about at all. In fact, there are songs about it for heteronormative things. I mean, anybody just listen to Steel Panther for about 15 seconds and you'll have more than enough understanding of what I mean when I'm saying that this has been a heteronormative thing since like the 60s and 50s, because they've been doing this to women for goodness knows how many years. And suddenly, when God forbid you do it to another man, it becomes absolutely and utterly incorrect.
Yeah.
But
So I do think that's a big thing, is that people do think about sex, and it's sex that, kind of scares people off. But just as a general question, this is something that I've come across within furry. I'm curious to what you guys think. Imagine that, you're at I don't know, like a fur meet or a fur con, and there's two fursuiters there. And one of them is, they're both good fursuits, but you know full well that one of them that has been used to have sex in. Does that affect your relationship with the fursuits at all? Are you less likely to go and hug one than the other?
no, probably not.
I would.
I think a lot of people are. I think that's a pretty. And my question is, why?
If that's the case, and again, I'm going to put that out there. This is that if that's the case, then I should probably not hug anybody.
Why?
Because you just had sex, possibly 2 days ago.
Oh no, I mean, yeah, but you still, like fursuits are cleanable.
Yeah.
That people have sex in their, their human bodies, and they go and hug people with those.
Yeah. My first reaction would be no, but like on introspection, you do like know that unless this person is like an absolute filthmonger,
Does not follow the 621 rule.
just does not follow the 621 law. Yeah, then there's probably no reason for you.
Yeah. And there's another thing as well with I was thinking about this because I was reading with some amusement. The Oregon militia that have taken over that wildlife refuge, and people are sending all their old sex toys to them. And the question is that the old sex toy, so the former sex toy, is something which is actually it has no value. And so would you use a sex toy that someone else has used? Now, they're perfectly cleanable. And let's face it, when you have sex with someone, they're having a body where they've probably had sex with other people. It's not a hygiene issue, but there is something about it that makes it like a little bit like kind of, oh, I'm not so sure about that. A little bit like, I think, the fursuit that, someone might have used to have sex with, or with.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of comes down to the, like that homophobia is because sex gets involved, and all of a sudden there is this natural reaction. It's not something you can sit back and just. I think it's cheap to go, oh, that's a homophobic person, so therefore they're bad and wrong. That reaction that people have when sort of sex all of a sudden gets put on the table, everyone kind of like immediately goes, oh, I'm not so sure about that. Like the second-hand dildo or the fursuit that someone's had sex in.
Yeah. Because, I mean, yeah, like you said, they are perfectly cleanable. Yeah. I don't know.
I should point in there. So Flug is making a good point. Not every single sex toy. It depends on what they're made with. Some of them are porous, but when you buy a sex toy, you should know how to care for it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, the question that Wolf of Dawn puts out there is that necessarily a natural reaction? It's not. Because again, the conversation isn't there. Without the conversation, without being open and honest about it, as parents should be, instead of giving you a book that says, "Oh no, but God will fix you," or and I had that book. I had this book where it literally told me everything that I needed to know about being a boy, and all of these wonderful little things like the menstrual cycle and this and that. I'm going to sit there going like, "Okay, cool. This is informative. At least now I know how it works." And I mean that's all good and fine. But the thing is that at the end of the day, you kind of look at your parents at one point and say, "But why can't you engage with me about this topic?"
Yeah, I think that's Wolferdorn's point, is that it's not a natural inbuilt reaction. It's a trained reaction. Yeah, we all know that it doesn't take long to get over a feeling of disgust towards sex or anal sex or oral sex or really any kind of sex in general, whatever may have existed there. It's something that we're trained to do, and it does go away. So no, it's not. It's not natural. We wouldn't be a very successful species if disgust towards sex was a natural part of it.
Yeah. This is weird to think
but it is common, though. It is common, and maybe it's part of a religious upbringing. Maybe it's just part of culture that we live in.
It's a fear. But back to our original...
Sorry, it's common to the point where, like, someone could... you could have just finished going down on someone, and... They would want to share a drinking bottle with you, and you go like, ew, no, you just drank out of that. That kind of thing.
Is this actually a hypothetical, or are you thinking of something that happened recently?
No, hypothetical completely. Thank you for the slow clap in the background.
You're welcome.
But But I'd say, yeah, when it comes to homophobia, that's an issue. And honestly, when it comes to, I reckon that it's the gay men are more of a target than gay women, and I reckon that there's a misogynistic component to this as well.
Yes, that's what I was going to get to.
Being gay is feminizing. That being, the bottom in a homosexual sex act is somehow more demeaning than being a top.
Who's the girl?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that comes down fundamentally to sexism.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was getting down to as well. Because when Scratch and I were having this conversation earlier this week, because we knew that this was going to come up. Well, I knew that it was going to come up, and I was telling him about it. It was actually based off of a murder in Ceres that had happened recently, or the person had been
Satellite.
Yes, satellite for being a homosexual, but and with a crowd watching as well. But the thing is that. Yeah, crowd of kids. That's wonderful to bring that kind of fear towards them. And I mean, he asked me the sort of same question, and I pretty much just said it's because men are terminally afraid that at one point another man is going to treat them like they treat women.
Yeah, yeah. I can tell you that certainly. I used to like play sport, and being a gay man in a dressing room, I can tell you that there is a fear where people essentially start treating you as if you're a potential rapist. People become uncomfortable. But people become uncomfortable about like sharing a shower with you. When they didn't know that I was gay, there were no problems. And of course, there's not going to be any problems because I'm not a rapist. Yeah, but that instinct does kick in, and I like that. It's a very pithy line. I quite like it. But yeah, there's an element of that as to it's all of a sudden they are worried about becoming the subject of the male gaze.
Yeah, because
I mean the male gaze is
predatory.
Yeah, the male gaze is so, so chilled and so suave and etc. etc. And you're gonna sit there going like, that guy's just trying to pick your pants.
As we all are, in some
No,
way.
It's not right.
Yeah, I know.
That shouldn't be the way that we see sex. That should definitely not be the way that we sex. That should not be the way that we sex.
Yes.
The way that we should sex, we should have a definition for it, and we should put it into a box, and we should say, this is what sex is. And then go, that's exactly how it's supposed to be done. If you do not do it like that, then it's deviant. Yeah, I mean, that's not how it's done.
Yeah. I think furry does a pretty good job in general. What we're complaining about here is largely what goes on out in society. Whereas furry does have that, like it is sex positive, where people are pretty good with, like weird sex acts, are certainly good with gayness. Are good with people who choose not to have sex for whatever reason. We're doing a pretty good job. It's not perfect, but in general, like we're a very, very sex positive group. We're terrific with different sexual orientation. We're terrific with sort of those deviant sex acts we were talking about before. We're good with different expressions of gender. Yeah, it's a pretty remarkable group in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, we've got about 12 minutes left. Mm-hmm. So we should start sort of wrapping this up, I guess. I think come to a complete conclusion. And obviously, I mean, this conversation is far from over. I think there are a lot of dynamics that we probably skipped over. And for those of you who are listening, who probably wanted us to maybe talk about something differently or anything along the lines of that. Again, we are doing this as PG-13 as possible. It's pretty much, once again, this is about the point where when I was 11 years old, this was the book that I was given. This is how it was done. That's literally how I see it. When I asked my parents the first time going, what is sex? This was the book I got. So this is kind of the conversation that we've been speaking about in and around that. So we will be keeping it as PG-13 as possible. So a lot of things and a lot of topics that we have skipped over. We're sorry if it was intentional to be like that, and unfortunately it has to be intentional because there are specific rules on the radio station that we're using. But again, like this conversation, I think if there are any perspectives or things like that you'd like us to focus on at a later stage, maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks, if JM is available. Or maybe even just more about some of the other research that's been done, rather than just sexuality. Maybe.
Well, like I say, I think that there's a lot of conversations about sexuality, and I'm happy to chime in if people do have questions about it. I see zoophilia's popped up, and that's something that we've got some interesting data on.
Yeah. So, and again, like those are interesting questions. So what you guys can do is, if you want to send us any questions or things like that you'd like us to create as topics, and maybe suggest people that you'd like us to have these topical conversations with, well, I think, Scratch, maybe we do this about once a month.
What? No, we do.
Where it's instead of just having like a guest or having us talk as 2 or 3 or 4 different people in Peanut Gallery and all that kind of stuff, but we have like an informative panel discussion once or twice a month. We'll see how it works out. But yeah, if you guys really want to actually like have that done, then just mail us at south-afrifur@gmail.com. And send us your suggestions. Let us know. We're more than open. We're more than willing to be open to that kind of thing. And JM, if you're more than welcome, you're more than welcome to come on again. And we're more than, and hopefully we'd be able to invite you again if you've got the time.
Oh, I think that'd be great. I'd love to.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, I mean, again, send us an email, south-afrifur@gmail.com, with your suggestions, comments, things that you'd like us to improve. Whatever you guys would like to. Obviously, we're also on Tumblr, we're on Facebook, we're on
all the things.
Twitter. Did I tweet? I didn't tweet this week. Damn it. I did?
No, you did.
I did?
Well, James did.
Yeah, woo! Anyway.
Congratulations, you remembered a thing.
I Facebooked as well, and I, like, Google Plussed. Yeah, I do that too. Any case, so yeah, I mean, closing statements, JM?
Oh, look, I just think it's been a really interesting conversation. It's been a terrific time. I'm one, like, furry's important to me, and I'm big on furry in general, so I always appreciate the chance to come and talk about something which is my passion.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, and that probably brings us to, I mean, anything in respect to the conversation that you'd like to really sort of focus on, maybe sort of, again, like closing statements on some of the topics that we were talking about?
Sorry, is that geared towards me?
Yeah, that's directed towards you.
I think just the general sort of the thing that furry does well about sex positivism is that, I think it's something that we do well, and it's also something that we collectively can get better at. Being sex positive doesn't mean being accepting of everything without thinking about it, but it does mean, having appreciation for the fact that people approach sex in different ways. And just because something sounds a bit weird or it's a bit unusual, that in itself doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. I think that, being accepting and talking to people, be them, stereotypically male and gay, or, female and straight, or asexual, or, really anywhere along that great sexuality and gender spectrum, it does a lot of good for people to talk about sex. It's easy to do if your sexuality or gender expression are pretty mainstream, but it's difficult to do if you're, something which is, perhaps a bit different and something which is not talked about in polite company. So I think any time that you might have the opportunity to talk to people about their sexuality is you'll be doing a good thing for them and a good thing for yourself and a good thing for furry.
Okay.
Anything of any like upcoming surveys or anything, or somewhere you want to point our listeners that they may want to contribute, possibly?
Is there a Patreon site for Adjective Species?
So I'll put on just the website. I mean, it's adjectivespecies.com, but there it is anyway. There's also the Adjective Species Twitter, which is AdSpecies. Furrypoll.com is where the survey goes. We will tweet out on AdSpecies when the 2016 one is ready to go. I don't think it'll be far off. I'm 90% sure that it's not open yet. But yeah, that's the places. We do need people to contribute. Furries have been generous with their time and honest with their answers for a decade or so. And the more years of information we have, the higher quality it is. And it's not just us, of course. It's the researchers as well. It's become a terrific resource.
Okay.
Awesome.
Any Patreon site that you have, maybe? For contribution.
Patreons or fundraisers or anything?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. There was a bit of wind on the sound.
Are there any Patreons or fundraiser pages you want to point anyone to?
No, it's something that we've been talking about. It costs money to run a survey and run a site, and Macchio, who's the site founder, she's the one who's paying for it. So it would be nice. We're sort of exploring ways to help, sort of defray those costs. It is in the hundreds of dollars a year. Watch this space.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, if and when that does sort of come live, just let us know. We'll let even if it's not, say, a formal session with you, just let us know. We'll plug it later in the show if you'd like us to.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I will do so.
Okay, that's 5 minutes. I think this is pretty much as good a place as any to sort of thank our guests. Thank you, JM, for being on again. Really always
it's my pleasure. It's been great fun. It's been really good fun.
It's always eye-opening.
It was eye-opening. It was awesome. And yeah, I mean, like, like I said, I mean, this conversation is very far from over. I think it deserves a lot more airtime. And again, like my personal perspective, as many people have heard so far already, this conversation needs to be talked about, and it needs to be talked about over and over and over again, so that people can begin to understand the complexity of it. Yeah, and obviously, and I'm droning on again. So, Raven, I'm terribly sorry. But yeah, so what I'd also like to do is I'd just like to thank our guests off of the FurStream site. We obviously, those of you who are new to furry.fm, we run off of FurStream and furry.fm. We tend to thank the people who are listening from both sides, if they were commenting on both sides. So if you were listening and you want to be part of the conversation and you're listening from furry.fm, you're more than welcome to just open up the homepage. You'll see the chat window open up on the side. You open up that side window and you go, hey, how are you doing? And, make yourself known a little bit. If you have any questions about something, more than welcome to speak to us. Mm-hmm. So from the furry.fm side, we have Mithra, Bangladesh, Scott the Bad News Bear, Bashir, and Nameless. There are 16 people on this chat.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to all the other nameless folks.
To all the other nameless folks. Yeah,
even Raccoon.
And then from the FurStream side, again, obviously, Furry.fm has a Patreon page as well as FurStream. Go support them if you want to hear more things like this. Yeah, and I mean, it's always good fun for us to be able to do this. And then, of course, from FurStream side, thank you, Raccoon, Kink, NZA, Maroter, Neon, Wolfodon, Doge, Ravensong, Asbjorn, Arashi, Green Drag. Is that Fluge in Wolf or Fluga in Wolf? Or Flugel in Wolf?
No, you're kind of miscarrying it now.
Okay, fine. And then Kane and Jay Badger, thank you guys very so much for all listening. And obviously for those of you who are listening who haven't been part of the conversation, thank you so much. And yeah, Jay and Scratch, bless you.
Mm-hmm. That's right, no, that's just the cat in the background.
Oh.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, ignore him. Yeah, no, it was quite something.
All right.
Yeah,
yeah,
thanks again. And Scratch, thank you for being here. You're awesome.
I occasionally deliver input.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, guys, and yeah, we'll see you guys next week, Sunday. Scratch, how are we on that guest of ours?
Still a little bit in the dark, but I will chase up some leads.
Flug. Okay, Fluga in. Okay, never mind.
Okay.
He said Flug is hard G. Okay, any case. Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, folks.
James, you still there?